if you can go no contact, do it. Do it even if you can't. Like please do it now because you are being slowly poisoned day after day after day.
Hello, and welcome to How to Be a Terrible Daughter, the podcast where Elizabeth and I hate your parents for you.
I'm Elizabeth.
I'm Megan, and we are cousins who grew up in the same dysfunctional family unit.
Okay. I love that we're cousins. Okay. So today's topic is it's going no contact.
Yeah.
So yeah, strap in, right? So going no contact is a self-protective measure that involves cutting off all communication with someone, like an ex or a
Or your
parent,
mother.
or your father, right?
Or
We
your
just
father.
had Father's Day before this recording. So cutting off all communication with someone to create physical and emotional distance. So this includes phone calls, texts, social media interactions, in-person meetings, and kind of anything else you can think of. And the goal is to help you heal and focus on yourself rather than the other person.
So why would you do this? I'm guessing if you've made it this far in the podcast that you're someone who would understand why you would do this, or at least have some idea that this could be a healthy thing for you to do. But, just to sort of take it from the beginning, the reason you would do this is because you have someone in your life who your interactions with them are so triggering and so toxic and so damaging, even if it's not every interaction, right? But it's sort of this pattern that, every so often you have these interactions that are just so, I was going to say heart-wrenching and hurtful, that it becomes almost impossible to have this person in your life. And again, this could be a parent, this could be a friend, this could be, another relative. And, one of the things you said when you were saying, when you were talking about the definition is, the goal is to heal and focus on yourself rather than the other person. A lot of times this is a person that won't leave you alone. Even if you have tried putting boundaries in place to say, I need more space, I need time to heal, they find sneaky ways around that. So, this is also something that often people will do when the other person, they've tried very clearly stating, like, I need some time and space, and the other person just isn't able to respect that. It's a process. I went no contact with my mom probably over the course of about 5 years, somewhere between like 5 and 7 years. Again, I started with these boundaries, putting these boundaries in place of, I need to limit the number of times we talk, trying to put in place that we only talk on Sundays. That wasn't respected. I remember once she called me on a Wednesday, which, we agreed not to do that. And she said, well, I ran into someone that was a friend of one of your high school friends, and they said hi, and I thought you'd want to know that.
Yeah.
And I was like, that you think is something that's worth disrespecting my boundary or breaking my boundary for? Like, just, and then she was, of course, horrified that I was mad because she was just trying to do a nice thing, right?
Right. Well, I have no boundaries, so why should you have boundaries?
Yeah.
And you having boundaries makes me feel rejected and excluded, and my feelings are what matters.
Thank you, narcissist. Yeah. So it's something that takes a long while. So yeah, for me, it took years of trying different configurations, of going to family therapy with my mom, of trying all sorts of things. And then eventually I just sort of decided that I needed that time and space and that she wasn't going to give it to me. And I didn't necessarily know that it was going to be no contact forever. In fact, I think when I said it to her, I said, I need to not talk to you until I'm ready, right? So I didn't give a specific timeline, but I did think that there would be some point in the future where, I would have had the time and space to heal and I might be able to have her back in my life. But that never happened and was honestly the best decision I've ever made. So, the process takes a long time, but it also, I probably should have done no contact with her years before I did. And I can say the same for you. So
yes.
I watched you
oh my God.
with your mom that I wish you'd got no contact with her, 20 years earlier.
Me too. Jeez.
Yeah, I mean, once you sort of realize like, oh, this person's not going to change unless they go to therapy. And again, if I was no contact with my mom and she decided to go into therapy and get some help, and communicated that to me, like I might have tried having a relationship with her again, right? So, And I did tell her that. And you told your mom the same thing. Like, look, here are the conditions on which I would speak to you again, right? Like going to therapy was one of them, right?
Yeah. I am your child. Can you just for a moment play along? Well, even if you believe I'm full of shit, even if you believe I'm delusional and sick and angry and misplaced aggression and blah, and it's unfair what I'm saying, just why don't you play along? I've been doing that with you for years. Come on.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, in a lot of things, so I didn't talk to my mom for probably 30 years. I did go see her in the hospital right before she passed away. And the question I get most from people is, did you regret it? And I can say with 100% certainty, no, I did not regret it one bit. It was, for me, the best decision I've ever made for my own sanity. I didn't feel bad when I went to see her in the hospital and she was dying. I didn't have any regrets over like, oh my God, now she's dying and I won't be able to, I squandered all these years. No. And that's sort of the type of question I get from people who don't have this kind of mother, right? Didn't you regret it? You surely did when you saw her dying. I was like, no. And I think people, the normies who don't have this type of parent in their life, like can't understand that. In fact, the interaction I had with her in the hospital when she was dying reinforced that I had made the exact correct decision. So I was glad I went to see her for that reason, that I was like, yep, that was the best thing I've ever done to protect my sanity and my mental health. So, that's the question I get the most, I think, from people who are thinking of going no contact is, did you regret it after she died? And I can say for myself, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yeah. It was absolutely the right decision.
I feel the same way. I wish I had gone no contact 20 years before. That's what I regret. I remember recently someone asking me that, like, well, do you regret it? And I started to say, what I regret is that I didn't do it sooner. And I heard this like, this shock. But oh my gosh, it's tough because I, of course, believe so strongly in people's ability to kind of make their own decisions and all this stuff. But I just want to shout it from the rooftops. If you can go no contact, do it. Do it even if you can't. Like please do it now because you are being slowly poisoned day after day after day. And you're already a beautiful person. But oh my gosh, there's so much joy in the world. And there's so many good, amazing things you could be doing. And there's so many people who would appreciate your love and you just being you. There are worlds and worlds and worlds and worlds out there that are so much better than this nightmare bullshit that you have been spoon-fed and spoon-fed.
Yeah. And you almost can't realize all of the poison and the bullshit until you go no contact. Because you're swimming in the water and you haven't removed yourself from the situation to get the 10,000-foot view of the whole terrain, right? You've just been slogging through it. So, yeah, two things. One, the amount of healing that happens just from going no contact, like all those years of therapy and like, meditation and whatever that you've done, like going no contact, like will exponentially fast forward that. And the other thing is, it doesn't have to be permanent, right? I mean, if you're thinking of this as something and you're like, God, I don't know what to do. When you first do it, it doesn't have to be so final. Like, I'm never going to speak to this person ever again.
Yeah.
You probably won't once you get a taste of what it feels like.
And also how they respond. Because a reasonable person, it's like, and you can check yourself, right? If you had a friend or a cousin or something like that who was like, you know what, I'm really overwhelmed, or like, there's just something kind of toxic about this, and I just need to take a break. And I mean, I wouldn't you look at yourself?
Yeah.
Even a little bit.
And wouldn't you respect that, if you care about that person, wouldn't you respect that even if you disagree with it, that they are doing what they feel like you'd let them explore what they feel like they needed at this point in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the irony is that you wouldn't have to go no contact with someone who was doing that. I think of my boundaries sometimes as that mixture that you get with cornstarch and water. I can't remember what it's called. It's like a special thing. It's not a liquid and it behaves like a liquid and it behaves like a solid. So,
I know what you're talking about. I can't remember the name of it, but yes.
Yeah. So if you
put it on top of speakers and it makes funky patterns when they turn the sound on.
Oh, no. I think this is something different. So it's like a liquid, right? And so if you kind of like slide your hand in, there's no problem. There's flow, right?
Right.
But if you smack it, right, if you put a lot of force in it, then it will behave like a solid. So you could actually run across a pool of this material and it will actually hold your weight. And so this thing about going no contact is actually an appropriate response to the level of vitriol and essentially aggression. Yeah. And of course, the attack and disrespect of your boundaries. But the force of their disrespect, it is appropriate ultimately to meet it with that level of firmness.
I think that a lot of people know that it's bad, but they don't know how bad it is. Like they don't know quite how toxic and disrespectful it is. For me, I questioned myself like, okay, I mean, it was my internal voice mimicking what I was hearing from society at large, which was like, okay, she's got her issues, but she's your mother. Like, how can you stop talking to her? Right. And I think one of the things that became clear to me after I went no contact was how bad it really was. And that the other mothers that people are talking about when they say it's your mother, how bad can it be, are mothers that maybe like are a little depressed or complain a little too much or a little anxious and so nag you a little too much. Like, I think that's the type of mothers people are talking about when they say, but it's your mother, you just, be there for her. She was there for you. It's not the type of mother we're talking about here, right? It's a very different, it's a very, very different type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on a little bit and talk about, so that was sort of like the why you would go no contact. Let's talk a little bit about the how. So what does it look like? I will say, as a caveat, not a caveat, but, I still stand by raving that it was the best thing I've ever done for myself. Yeah. I will also say it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done.
Oh, yeah.
So, which it's both in terms of my own emotions and my own feelings around having to cut my own mom out of my own life. I mean, I always tell people it was the roughest breakup I've ever had.
Yeah.
Knowing someone's not good for you and sort of saying it's done is one thing when it's a lover or a friend. When it's your mom, that hits deeper than, almost anything else, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard on that level. It's like, so sort of personally, it's hard. It's also hard because the narcissist will retaliate. And so you're dealing with your own internal sort of trials and tribulations of your own feelings about it. And then simultaneously, you're dealing with either the narcissists themselves or their flying monkeys, right? Other family members or their friends who they send after you.
Yeah. I also think it's really helpful to differentiate, because I think that what happens on the inside are two things. You have your own feelings, right? Like as like a person who grew up really wanting to be loved by this person, right? So that's actually, we talked about it last time. Like this is healthy, or not last time, but the attachment episode. So you've got your own, like, I'm a human being and this is a really important person and I really, really wanted this to work, right? And then there's all of the landmines psychologically that this toxic person installed in you that are set up to go off when you do this, right? Like this chain reaction. And so there's this, this shame and this vitriol and all of these things that are now inside of you that maybe you didn't even realize were there. It's like once you cut it off, it's like they press the button. And of course, they don't all go off at once, right? But it's just like boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
And this is after you've cut contact, right?
Right.
So sometimes doing the right thing feels even more soul destroying than what you think you've gone through.
Yeah. I would say if you're going to go no contact with a narcissist, like absolutely have a therapist that you're seeing at the time, if you can, because those bombs go off and you really need someone outside of yourself to be like, that's not true. Like, you are not the worst person in the world. I know you. And I can definitively say you are not the worst person in the world,
Even one therapist is not enough. You need a whole tribe of people.
Well, yes, you need friends. If there are other family members that can sort of see the truth of who this person is, I mean, you were that person for me, absolutely. I mean, so, just to talk about some of the ramifications, I would say 80% of my family members stopped talking to me when I stopped talking to my mom, including your parents, actually, because they were still friends with her at the time. And basically, my mom called these people up and gave them an ultimatum. She said, Megan has done this horrible, terrible thing. And if you talk to her, that is tacit support for what she's doing. And so your choice is either to talk to her or talk to me. But if you're talking to her, I won't talk to you. And so she really gave people an ultimatum. And, because she was such a monster, I think people knew on some level that it was easier to just go along with her than it was to try to fight for me, right? Because fighting for me would have meant they would have had to go up against her. And they just didn't have the amount invested in it that, they did. Also, I don't think they knew,
No.
Narcissists are really, really good at keeping the abuse private, And so I remember years later having a conversation with a cousin, and I forwarded him an email that my mom had sent to me. And it was sort of like, he replied back with, oh my God, Megan, I'm so sorry. I never knew. Like, I knew she was crazy, but I didn't know it was this bad. I am so sorry. Right. So, I think a lot of people didn't know. So what I was doing did seem out of the blue and like maybe overreacting, right? Because they only had my mom's side of the story. So definitely having those people who you've already had conversations with and they get it, and a therapist, I think is really, really important if you're going no contact with a narcissist. Because there are all sorts of complications that come up afterwards. In fact, when we do the crazy mom off, we're doing it a little bit differently today. I'm really excited about it. We're actually going to tell stories of what we heard the other person's mom say after they went no contact, which is pretty scary. So yeah, I mean, I would say the argument for it is just if you are feeling like this person is not going to change, like they're not listening to you and respecting your boundaries, and they're not willing to, you have reasonable requests like, hey, could you go to therapy? And they're not willing to even try, the arguments against it, I mean, you could probably speak to those because I know I didn't have kids, which made it a lot easier, right? For you, I know it was more complicated. And you also have, a good relationship with your dad. So you would have also probably been
Yeah,
losing that as well, right? Whereas my parents were divorced, and they weren't
that's true.
speaking. So,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't have to risk that.
Yeah, that made it easier. I think that no matter what your situation is, planning the cutoff requires surgical precision and tremendous planning, like a chess game, right? Just for your benefit, because what happens is that the narcissist will escalate and they will escalate. And when that doesn't work, then they'll send out the flying monkeys. And then when those don't work, other monkeys, and they'll escalate and escalate and escalate. So planning ahead is helpful for you because what you're essentially doing is creating a bunker for yourself because you cannot keep those explosions or that escalation from happening. Like it will happen. I think one of the things that's really helpful in when you're thinking about this, should I cut off this person? When you start thinking about what you are afraid they're going to do, if you do that, your body, in terms of like fight or flight, is going to say, okay, that means that I'm not going to do that because that shit's going to get crazy and it's going to get
Yeah.
horrible. But then it's like, wait a minute. If this is a person that you are afraid of and they're going to do that, that is not a good reason to keep in contact with them. That's actually really evidence to the contrary.
Yeah.
And this is also where a therapist can really come in, which is like, okay, let's look at this, right? Where are you vulnerable? How can this person have access to you? And unfortunately, how can anyone have access to you? Because I know, like from personal experience and whatever, you can block their phone number. Oh, but they'll have someone call for you, or
No,
they'll call
absolutely.
from an unknown number, or they'll get a new email address, or, so it really requires some thought and planning.
It does. Yes. And, I will say, I think the big difference in what you said was when you think of what will happen if you go no contact with them, the level of fear that comes up. I have gone no contact with other people in my life for various reasons, like, oh, I'm trying to think. Like, I broke up with someone and I just needed some space to heal on my own, right?
Oh.
And I've told them, like, hey, I need to not talk for a while. And the worst I was afraid is that they would be mad at me and maybe never want to speak to me again. That was the worst thing that I was
Right.
afraid of, right?
Yeah.
With my mom, it was so much more. I mean, I was afraid for my safety. I was afraid for my freedom. Like, I was afraid she was going to call the cops and try to 5150 me because she threatened to do that in the past, right? So these are all things that were based on threats she'd made in the past. It was so much more than, oh no, this person's going to be mad at me,
Yeah.
When I think back on it, that was so telling, right? That was so telling about how toxic and horrible of a person she was, that I was afraid for my safety. I was really genuinely afraid for my safety. I was afraid that she would get me fired from my job because in the past she'd called employers. Like, so I was afraid that I would get fired and, wouldn't be able to pay my rent and buy food. So, I mean, I was genuinely afraid for my safety and survival. And looking back on it now, it's like, oh, well, yeah, of course. Like, yes, that relationship was super toxic. So I think you're
Yeah.
right. Sort of looking at what it is you're afraid of is going to happen can be, your initial reaction would be like, oh, no, I shouldn't do it because that's way too scary. And what if that happens? But also when you sort of pull back and look, you're like, oh, that is exactly why I need to not contact that person because I don't need someone in my life that I am afraid of to that level of their
Yeah.
reaction if something goes wrong.
Yeah. I do want to add that we are not talking about domestic violence issues. This is adult child parent relationships. They're not supposed to, have power over you or whatever. And so, like a domestic violence situation is much more complicated and it requires even more surgical precision. And so I just want to make sure that people kind of understand, that what we're talking about isn't like a boilerplate. Do you want me to talk a little bit about how I handled the complications with family, that kind of stuff?
Yes, why not? Go ahead. So I think yours was a little, like I said, yours was a little more complicated than mine because you have kids and you were close to other family members,
Yeah.
your parents were still married, whereas I didn't have those complications. So yeah, go for it. Tell us the complexities of your life. I want to hear.
Proof you're not a narcissist. You actually want to hear about me. So I think the thing that was really the most complicated was just that I have a kid, which is really kind of tough because I wanted my kid to possibly have a healthy relationship with my mom. And in some ways, I don't think it hurt them, but I do think that the kid part of me wanting to have a healthy relationship with my mom really kind of informed my wanting my kid to have that. And I'm really lucky in that I have a partner who, one, is an active parent, and two, is completely on my side, even though he's very well trained in communication and handling narcissists. Well, I mean, we've been together for decades, so he kind of knows how to handle my mom, or was, because my mom passed away. But so by the time I went no contact with my mom, I had been talking to her every day, and we were seeing them twice a week. And those conversations that, sometimes were hours long and sometimes more than once during the day. So my kid was seeing their grandparents twice a week. My husband was not able to do that. And that was really great because he was able to set that boundary. So he would go visit with my kid once a week, and he fielded all the calls. One of the nice things is that my mom didn't get electronics at all. So was not on social media, was not doing any of that stuff. And I also was not on social media, partly because unfortunately the social media algorithms, would be like, would you like to be friends with this person? And it's like, well, no, I'm not telling you either way, because it would be like a client. This happened several times. And it was like, you know what? I'm not even going to be on social media. So there were ways that my life had already been streamlined, but I blocked the emails, I blocked the calls. I always screen my calls. I almost never answer a phone number that I don't recognize.
Can I just say that once my mom died, I had this realization soon after that I could answer any phone call and it was going to be okay.
Oh,
Do you know what I mean? Like I could pick up an unknown number. I could pick up, it might be somebody I don't want to talk to, like a telemarketer or something. I didn't have to brace, like I didn't have to brace anymore when the phone rang. Because yeah, like you said, even if it wasn't from her number, she would call me from other people's numbers, right?
yeah.
So even if it was a number that wasn't hers, it wasn't safe to pick it up. So yeah, the call thing. Yeah. Anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that was one of the lovely things.
I would really love to do an episode where we just talk about what changed after our moms died, because that's something that I'm still exploring, because it's only been a couple of months. So there's all of these things that are happening in myself that I never would have predicted. I just never would have predicted. There's no way I would have known that. I think that might be really valuable.
Yeah. I think the change, obviously when I went no contact with my mom, huge amount of relief and things changed. And then when she died, it was like a whole other level of freedom.
Yeah.
Even though I hadn't talked to her in like over 20 years, there was still that fear there that she would somehow like get to me, that she would find a phone number or she would find out where I worked or, I got to the point where my mom like literally didn't know what city I lived in or where I worked or anything like that. And so there was always this fear that she'd find that and come after me, which sort of gets into like we sort of wrote down some helpful hints about if you do decide to go to no contact.
Yeah.
And again, this is very specifically for someone who is a narcissist or has another personality disorder. Most of the time, you won't need this if you're just going no contact with somebody unpleasant, let's say. But we sort of wrote down some things that will hopefully help you. So, one, and you sort of alluded to this with your husband, is have a designated person to read texts, emails, listen to voicemail messages. Don't be the person to open those or listen to those. Have someone else screen them first. And there probably will be anxiety that comes up that they're like, not telling you, like they'll miss a nuance that the person said or whatever, but just let it go. Let the fear come up and just let it go. Right. I mean, I think that's a big part of, like you said, those landmines that pop up after you go no contact. You just have to let the fear come up, go, oh, this is fear. Okay. I know why I'm afraid. I'm still staying no contact,
Yeah. It's also really helpful because you have a person who can really tell you if something's going on, like, oh, someone's in the hospital or, or some third thing, like, this other family member's going through something. You can contact them directly once. But the other really secret thing is actually the support that's created because, you have people who like read the emails or listen to the voicemails and are just like, oh my God. I actually had a client who we were in session and I guess I was commenting on the level of tension. And they were like, well, I got a voicemail message, and I haven't listened to it or whatever. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. And I listened to about like 20 seconds and I'm like, okay, we need to stop. Partly because of how I am feeling. And then let me tell you like the 7 things that your mom has done in this 20 seconds that are narcissistic and toxic and are designed to hurt you.
Yeah.
And it really just blew their mind.
Another tactic that I employed that worked incredibly well, and this has to be someone who, it's probably after you get over the initial hump, right, of sort of the fear and the trepidation. But I have had people do this for me and I have done it for others, and it's so helpful, is you take the email or the text and you do like a super overly dramatic reading of it.
Yes.
So it'll be like, I never thought that you as my daughter would do this kind of thing, right? I mean, you just make it like dripping with melodrama, like, the most intense telenovela ever created.
Yes.
And you read it with just this exaggerated tone and, gestures. And it actually really works to diffuse it. It makes it funny. And it also is helpful because it does show you how out there what they're saying is. Do you know what I mean? Like how just totally over the top what they're saying is, and that it's not reasonable or normal at all. I highly recommend the dramatic reading. I actually love doing them. So if there's any listeners who have a crazy text or email from their parent and they would like me to read it, just email us, h2beterrible@gmail.com. I will send you back an audio recording of me doing it over the top reading of your.
Oh my God. A whole series of reels. I want to see those.
Yes.
I want to see those.
So that's one, is just have that designated person. The next thing is, be really, really mindful of which family members you give updates to about your personal information. We all know narcissists are incredibly manipulative and will get that information out of them. My mom's trick was to tell family members that she was worried that I was suicidal and that she needed my information, for my own protection, right? Because she was worried that I was suicidal. And then be really, really thorough. And this is sort of similar. Be really thorough about not only who you give the information to, but think of all the ways this person could get to you. So social media, your employer. When I first went no contact, I was lucky in that I was self-employed, so I didn't have to worry about that. But when I did get jobs later and I, would sort of get to a point with my employer, I would say, hey, if this person ever calls, just know that I don't want to talk to them. And whatever they're saying, like, please check with me first. Like, I actually let my employers know. Or, I said, if anyone calls and asks for my information, regardless of what story they're telling, like, please check in with me first, because I do have this history with family members. And then, block everything. create filters to send everything to spam. Just do your best to not even know that this person's trying to contact you.
Yeah.
As best you can. I'm just thinking when I first went no contact with my mom, this was back in the days where there were answering machines, right? There weren't cell phones or voicemail. And she somehow found my work number. Again, this is my own business. And I had a long weekend. It was like a 4-day weekend. And I come back to my office it was probably like a Tuesday. So I think I took like Friday and Monday off. I came back on the Tuesday and my answering machine was full. Ooh. And it was over 50 messages from her getting increasingly angry. And I called my friend in to listen. I was like, come here and listen to this. And they were shocked. But, the first message was like, hi, sweetie, I found this number. I hope it's okay that I'm contacting you. I just want to let you know that I missed you and that I'm thinking of you. Right. So this like seemingly innocuous, sweet message. Right. And then they just got increasingly like, why haven't you called me back? Are you ignoring me? Like, da 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 da, right? That was maybe day 2 or 3. And then by day 4, it was just like, you are a complete bitch and you are a dishonor to this family. And I can't believe you're walking on the earth and, no one's ever going to love you. Like, I mean, just all of her like most hateful shit. And it was so interesting to me to like see the progression of that. Because she thought I was ignoring her calls when I was in fact like not even checking those messages, right?
Actually, can I point out something?
Yeah.
Which is, it was your work phone.
Yeah.
And it was a holiday weekend.
Yeah.
And this may not have been conscious for her, but like, that's a setup.
Yeah.
So here she has this opportunity to look good in the beginning, but she also has, maybe in the back of her mind, maybe she would know, well, Megan might not get these things until Tuesday. And so here I have all of this opportunity to let out all of this, whatever rage and shit that's coming up from my own life and my own history. I just have this like perfect amount of time and space for that.
Yeah. It does remind me of sort of that analogy we talked about a couple episodes ago of, our narcissist will break your legs and then ask you to run a marathon, right? So they'll set you up. They'll absolutely set you up, and then you can't do anything but fail their expectations because of the way they set you up.
Yeah. That's the point. So they can feel good about themselves because they need the good object, which if they possess you, that means that they are great. And then they also need something that they can deflect all of their shit onto so that they are clean.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So that they are clean. Absolutely. We should make some sort of comic about like narcissists going to get absolution, and it's by deflecting all of their shit onto someone else instead of actually asking forgiveness.
Yeah. Yeah. That is absolutely the case.
And so that sort of brings up the next strategy, which is gray rocking. Gray rocking is named that because you want to be as much like a gray, boring, featureless rock as you possibly can. So if they try to provoke you, do what a gray rock would do. Just sit there doing nothing and being uninteresting, right? So don't interact. Also, don't give them anything to start, right? So don't even say, remember once I said, hi, Mom, how are you? And that set her off.
Yeah.
You know how I am. You would know better than anyone. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So, just be as featureless and dull as possible. Don't react, don't do anything. What would a gray rock do? WWGRD, right?
And the funny thing is that, it's so easy how these things morph and whatever, but one of the nice things about no contact is that, you really don't actually have to gray rock anymore. Right? Like,
You
but
have to gray rock with the flying monkeys a little
absolutely.
bit, but
Yes.
yeah, not with the narcissists themselves. I would
Yeah.
also say for gray rocking, something that really has helped me is practicing a phrase that I'm going to say either to the narcissist or the flying monkeys and practicing it beforehand. So it could be something like, I have decided not to talk to you right now, right?
Hmm.
Or something like that. You could say that to the narcissist or the flying monkeys, or I'm not interested in talking to you right now, right? Or whatever the phrase is, or I'm not going to engage with you, right? Or something, right?
Hmm.
And then you just say that over and over again, no matter what they say, even if it doesn't make sense to say that back, you just keep saying it. And eventually what happens, so I feel like it's a like gray rocking sub technique.
Yeah.
Eventually what happens is the narcissist will get more and more angry, right? Because you're not taking the bait and you're not, giving them the attention that they want. But eventually they will walk away, being like, I can't talk to you. What, you're just insane. You keep saying the same thing over and over and over again, right? And they'll walk away. Great. That's exactly what you
Yes.
want from gray rocking
Yes.
is you
Yes.
want them to eventually leave. You're so uninteresting and there's absolutely nothing about you that can give them their narcissistic supply. So they walk away, right? That's sort of
Yeah.
the end result of gray rocking.
And also that goes with like texts and whatever. I mean, like I remember having a text conversation with the flying monkey, and I literally just cut and pasted. I just cut and pasted. Like it was like, you know. And actually the funny thing is that sometimes the flying monkeys also act as if you hadn't said anything. So it's like, like I would get these things of like, your mom needs help and like, what do you recommend? And it was like, well, the last 3 times you asked me about this, I said they need to find a therapist, right? Because they need to work on their trauma. And part of it is, I wasn't even talking about like their abusive behavior or anything like that. I'm like, they have trauma that they deserve to have someone listen and to work through. And they really need an evaluation for medication because a low dose of antidepressants would really help them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh, it's as if, oh, I hadn't said that ever.
Right. And
Like,
yeah, I mean, that's a good point is that I feel like when I first started doing the sort of repeated phrase, it was very much about protecting myself. It was very much about like, I am choosing not to talk to you right now. I am choosing not to talk to you right now. I am choosing not to talk to you right now. But I'm just thinking when I went to go see my mom right before she died, and she was asking over and over again, like, what happened between us and why haven't you talked to me? And da 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 da. And the phrase I came up with in the moment was, our relationship caused me too much anxiety and I had to step away, which is true, right? But it also was coming from a place where I did feel in that moment like that phrase was also, I was trying to help her with her trauma and her, do you know what I mean? Like it gotten
yeah.
to a place where, and also she was dying. I wasn't about to lay into a dying woman. I do have a tiny bit of a heart. But yeah, so I mean, the phrases can change too as you're, sort of going through the process. But I would say initially find one that feels really protective, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And at some point, it really is about other boundaries and being like, you know what? I'm not going to keep saying this phrase because it's not being heard. And also, like, if you have to block flying monkeys, block flying monkeys,
Oh, yeah.
Please do.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm thinking about when you're talking is it can be really helpful to look at recovery models like of addiction and like 12 step and that kind of like codependency. If you've really been hurt by someone or betrayed by someone, it's helpful for everybody. You step away. So even like in the amends process, right? Like let's say you've gotten sober and whatever, and you have this laundry list of people that you've hurt, right? And it wouldn't be that hard to figure out, oh, well, both of my kids don't talk to me. The amends process includes you don't have to explain to me or justify, your limits or whatever. You never have to forgive me. You don't owe me anything. And I understand that I may have burned this bridge,
Yeah.
right? So the accountability is purely on the person in recovery side, and there is no expectation or entitlement or whatever. I know that for me, it was so helpful to see people go through that process and have that as a comparison to, I don't understand, why you did this, or you're such a terrible daughter. How dare you? It's like, let's look at how this
Yeah.
possibly could go in terms of being accountable and really trying to repair a relationship, because that's what they're pretending that they want. That's not actually what they want. They don't want a relationship, right? They just want to alleviate their ego injury.
Yeah.
It's not about you at all.
No. And I think that really is the key difference, is that someone who really does want to make amends, you'd feel seen and heard afterwards, whereas you never do with a narcissist. You never quite do. All right, let's segue to our mini crazy mom off. Like I said, we're doing it a little differently this week, so usually we each tell a story that is crazy than our moms did. But this week, we're actually going to tell stories about the other person's mom that we either heard or witnessed or something like that. You want me to go first?
Yeah, because I'm having feelings about mine. Not having feelings about yours, but
Oh, interesting.
so validating. Okay, you tell your story first.
Okay, so I'll give a little bit of background. So Elizabeth came up closer to where I live, and we went on a meditation retreat together. And while we were on the retreat, I will say that every night she talked to her family. She talked to her kid. She talked to her husband. And a couple times she talked to her mom. I don't think it was every day, but at least a couple times that week, she checked in with her mom. And at one of the times when she checked in with her mom that week, her mom just went off on I think she was angry that you hadn't invited her to the retreat. She was mad that you had been away for a week and therefore missed the family dinner, which they had every week, right? I mean, this is she missed one of the family dinners that they had every single week. She was, anyway, infuriated. So Elizabeth was rightfully so, in tears and incredibly upset that her mom had treated her so badly. And so Elizabeth decided, I'm not going to speak to her for a while, right? Again, a completely appropriate response if someone is horribly mean to you, right?
Yeah.
So she decides to not speak to her. And a couple weeks later, and I was really proud of you, by the way, for holding that line and for actually not talking to her, because I know how hard that is, having done it myself. And a couple weeks later, I am talking to another relative who I won't name to protect the innocent and the guilty. I was talking to another relative and they said, "Have you heard about Elizabeth?" And immediately I was like, oh no, what crazy pants, messed up rumors has this person heard? And so what they said was, well, I heard that Elizabeth abandoned her family and ran off to Seattle, and they haven't heard from her, and they don't know where exactly she is, and that she's just basically completely lost her mind, and no one knows what's going on. Now, the only true part of that story is that you came to Seattle.
Okay, now I'm mad.
But you came to Seattle. I mean, you obviously told your family you were coming. You checked in with them multiple times. Everyone knew where you were. The entire week you were talking to me about being concerned about being away from your kid for so long, and, really checking in with yourself about what's healthy or not healthy for both me and them. Right. I mean, this could not be further from the truth.
And my mom knew about this trip for over a month.
Absolutely.
Like,
Your mom knew all of the details. This was just a complete fabrication to turn you into the villain and to make her look good, right? And so this was the story she told about why she hadn't heard from you, is that you'd ran off, nobody had heard from you, nobody knew where you were. So I paused and I said, does that sound like Elizabeth to you when you tell that story?
thank you.
And they said, well, no, not really, but, you never know, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, so there's sort of two possibilities here. One is that story is true and it doesn't sound like something Elizabeth would do. And the second one is that her mom is lying. And this relative said, well, why would their mom lie about something like that? And I said, well,
You've known her your whole life.
I said,
What do you think?
Here is what I know. I know that Elizabeth stopped talking to her mom because her mom said some really horrible things to her. And I think I repeated some of the things. And that her mom is incredibly upset about this. And so now is telling these stories to make Elizabeth look bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I could say that the person was like, oh, wow, yeah, that makes sense. Like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that Elizabeth's mom would lie like that. But that's not what happened. And I actually think it's important that that's not what happened, because this is realistically what happens when you go no contact with a narcissist, is that the person's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't really want to take sides and I don't know where the truth lies and blah, blah, blah. They sort of, deflected and deferred, right? And that is a lot of times what happens. Like, even when people are told the truth, it still somehow is muddy, right? It's still somehow this, vortex of like gaslighting and doubting and not knowing where the truth lies that no one wants to step in, right? So a lot of times people outside this is sort of what I was saying earlier, is it's just easier to not talk to the person who went no contact rather than confront the narcissist, right?
Yeah.
So you just don't want to step in the pile of crap that the narcissist has made with their gaslighting and with their craziness, essentially.
And they've been poisoning you too.
And so I left this conversation sort of shocked, although I shouldn't be. I mean, that's sort of the weird thing, is like, no matter how often you deal with a narcissist, it's still sort of shocking the lengths they will go to, right?
Yeah.
I was disappointed in this relative for not being able to see clearly what was going on. It's one thing if they didn't trust you and thought that the story was maybe true, but then they also didn't trust me, because I was like, I was there. I saw what happened.
I literally saw Elizabeth talking to her family.
Right. Yes. I literally planned with her for months in advance and heard her check in with her family on the phone when I was talking to her. Like, I know this isn't true. And so I think that's the insidiousness of this, is not only did this relative of mine not believe the person that the smear campaign was against, you in this case, they also didn't believe me. Like, I somehow got roped into being one of the people that wasn't telling the truth either, right? So, or they weren't sure, I should say, who was telling the truth, whether I was or somebody else was. And it's just so damaging. It really is like a tornado ripping through a house and just tearing everything apart. And I was so mad at your mom, because I knew that she had, with surgical precision, created that story to cut you where it hurts. Because you being a mom and breaking this cycle of abuse is so important to you, and you put so much heart and soul and sweat and tears into it, and you're doing it. It was like the one thing where she could jab at you and know that it would hurt. That if you knew there were rumors going around about what a bad mom you were, that was going to bring you to your knees, right?
Yeah.
And so I was so mad, just furious, which probably actually didn't help my case talking to this relative because now I was all worked up, right? And again, this is what narcissists do. This is exactly what they do. Now I sound irrational because I am so fucking angry at your mom that this relative is like, oh my God, why is she so mad? Now she sounds off kilter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was just so angry. It was so, and so when at that point I don't remember if it was before or after I told you this story that you sort of decided to make the no contact permanent. I think when you first stopped talking to her after that phone call, it was sort of like I said, like, I need to not talk to you for a while. I'm not sure when we can talk, but it's not going to be now. But at some point you decided, like, no, this is something that needs to be permanent. And I was, after hearing that story, was just so happy you made that decision because, again, what kind of person, if someone tells them, hey, I need some space,
Yeah.
starts spreading lies about them to family members about the thing that they care most about in the world?
Yeah.
It's just monstrous. It really is. It's monstrous.
I'm not even sure she waited until I cut her off. That's another thing, which is it's like, it's very possible that she just decided because she was angry that I had left town. You know what I mean? That it wasn't even like the big, the big boundary. And I think one of the things that was really helpful for me, yeah, it really solidified it a lot, was that by the time you told me, I think it seemed really clear that that she had told a number of people in my family this.
Well, I then heard it from a second relative.
Yeah.
And I think I told you that too.
Yeah.
So it was clear that it was like making the rounds of the family, you know?
Yeah. And I was not in a good place, right? And so, I mean, she kicked me when I was down and then kicked me again, so.
Fucking bitch. So glad she's dead. I'm so happy for you.
Me too. Well, it's like, what is it? I think it's what Mrs. White says in Clue. She's like, well, it's a matter of life and death. Now that my husband's dead, I have a life. Did I just use my outside voice? Okay. Okay. Is it my turn?
Yes, I'm still a little mad at your mom, but that's okay. I will just channel that and fuel that into anger at my own mom because essentially they were the same person in a lot of ways. So,
yeah, totally. I just want to say that, just hearing you feeling angry on my behalf and to hear the story from your perspective brought me to tears, and it brings me to tears.
I'm happy that I can be a mirror to you to reflect what I know you are.
Yeah. I would not have been able to cut myself off from my mom if it wasn't for you.
Aww.
And I'm really grateful. Yeah. Yeah.
I love you.
Okay. So this is my story about Megan and her mom. Oh, God, I have so many feelings about this story. And I think this is from having interacted with narcissists and flying monkeys so much, which is I'm so wanting to tell the story in exactly the right way to get the impact, because people don't hear it. They don't want to hear it. People who haven't been through this. So let me collect myself. So Megan has said before on the podcast that she had been diagnosed with cancer in the 30s. No,
yeah, my early 30s.
Early 30s. And Megan, rightfully so, decided not to tell most of the family. And I immediately understood that because it was like, you know what? Your body needs to fight this thing. You can't fight a war on 7 different fronts. So I knew that it was you were conserving your energy and you were prioritizing, and that I just knew how damaging people could be. Oh, but not this damaging. So after the treatment had been completed and whatever, and I do want to say, and this, I didn't tell anybody, but so somehow it's my mom found out, parents found out. So my mom told your mom. that you had had cancer and that you'd gone through treatment. And or basically, well, I think it was just it, Megan got diagnosed with cancer, and your mom's response was good. Now she knows how it feels. I'm like trembling. To want your own child to get sick like that. And it's even worse because your mom did go through that. And it's one thing to be petty and mean and to hate people enough to want something terrible to happen to them, let alone your own child, but to intimately know how terrifying that is and how destructive the treatment itself is and how derailing it can be on your life, to want that for your own child. I can't, my whole body is trembling. Like I can feel it in my elbows and in my legs. And like, I don't even know what to do with that. That is who your mom was. Absolutely 100%. This was not, sometimes when, you're in the midst of an argument, you say something mean that you don't mean. Oh, no, she absolutely meant that. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so at that point, if she hadn't been there before, she just was, in my mind, put in another box. This is the box of like, oh, someone else can forgive you, but you would have to seriously work at it to get out of my box,
And when you told me that, my first thought was, I did make the right decision in not telling her. Like it actually helped me because I, of course, questioned it, right? I went through cancer treatment relatively alone because I didn't tell most of my family, right? Most of the time when you get diagnosed with something like that, you tell everyone so that you can like rally the wagons, right? And get everyone to support you and help you,
Yeah.
And I mean, I had my friends and I had a few select family members, and you were amazing. You flew up and took care of me on several occasions and were just great, and did so all the while hiding it from your own parents, which, But when you told me that, I was just like, oh, I did make the right decision. Like, I absolutely did make the right decision. And I wasn't surprised that she said it because, again, that's who she was. She'd said horrible things along those lines to me my whole life. But I was still really sad. There was a part of me that hoped that something as serious as cancer would break through the narcissistic wall. But to know that not even that would do it was really telling.
Yeah.
That she made it about herself.
Yeah.
And how I'd hurt her, and that now I knew how hurtful it was. That was really, really, really telling.
Yeah.
I think that story is important for a couple reasons. But one is, you said you wanted to tell the story precisely and correctly so that when people ask me, how can you not talk to your mom, or what could she possibly have done to make it so that you wouldn't talk to her?
Yeah.
That's always a story. I mean, I don't, if it's a stranger, I won't, I'm not about to get into the details of my trauma with them. I just say bad things. But I feel like that's sort of like a narcissistic story wrapped in a bow. It's just so almost
It's the shit. It's the shit bag.
It's almost
the shit bag.
It's the shit bag. It's almost comically villainous. Like you can't believe that someone would actually say that about their own daughter. Good. I'm glad that she got cancer. Now she knows what it's like. Yeah. So I think it's important because it is a true story. True
Absolutely.
story. That's what we're talking about on this podcast. It's that level of toxicity and that level of just meanness. Sorry, you either got to laugh or cry. And so suddenly I had this thought of like, What if I died from cancer? Would she have had the same reaction?
She would have been thrilled. No, she would have been
Now
happier.
she knows. Yeah.
I think one of those hidden things in that story is that she would have wanted it to be worse. It
Yeah.
wasn't enough for her.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, I'm momentarily satisfied by the amount of suffering my own child has experienced. It didn't satisfy her.
Oh.
She wanted more.
There is literally no amount of suffering that I could have gone through that in her mind would have made up for what I put her through.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
Right.
even getting cancer was not enough for me to like have the payback that I deserved for how badly I'd treated her.
Which amounted to needing a ride to school, which I'm still not fucking over, and actually just being kind enough to walk away from the relationship instead of getting your revenge and abusing her in return, which is exactly what she would have done.
Yeah.
In some ways, and this is something to just, if you're listening to this podcast, you know, that cutting off someone, if that is the meanest thing that you can imagine, and that's what you've been told, that is sometimes the kindest thing that you could possibly do, the most respectful compared to all of those other things that they would do to you and have done to you that you would not even consider.
Yeah. That was, I mean, you're right. You know, to clarify, that was the disrespect that she felt like I was getting payback for, was going no contact with her.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. All right.
Fucking hate your mom.
Like, I mean, I almost can't wait until I die so that I can get to the other side and punch her in the face. I should have done it while she was alive.
Oh, you're too good of a person to have done that.
No, and
Oof.
I don't like that about myself.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Oh, and it just, yeah, all the stuff about being a good person and tone policing and all this stuff. I heard that in when you were talking to this person and you were getting angry on my behalf, and their response was like, oh, well, that person's having anger or feelings, and so that automatically invalidates them, and oh, they shouldn't be having those feelings. It's just like, what are my other options?
Right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I'm
Yeah.
still not shit talking this person or telling lies or, I'm still not doing any of the things
That they're doing.
these narcissists do.
Yeah.
Right?
I know. That's the damaging part of this is narcissists will make it so that you really don't have any other option but to be furious or hysterically upset or hurt. I'm reclaiming the word hysterically, by the way. And then you look like you're overreacting. Like it's a setup. Like you said, earlier in the episode, it's absolutely a setup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's no way to get out of the setup other than walking away and going no contact.
Yeah.
It's the only way.
It's like the horror movie where someone who is like perfectly sane gets, 5150'd and they get locked up in a mental ward and they're like, I'm fucking sane. And everyone's
Right.
like, oh, they're angry and they're saying they're sane. Oh, they're really, it's like, God damn it,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's quickly, because I know we've been talking a while. So if you've listened to this far in the podcast, thank you. And we love you. Let's do some tools that we used to get through this week, something that came up. Do you have anything in mind, or should I go?
I do. I actually have a lot, which feels really great.
Ooh.
But the big thing, the big game changer is it came out of therapy a week ago. We were doing an EMDR session and I was working with my inner child, which please don't eye roll like this. This is
Oh God, no. Inner child
I'm not
work.
talking to you. I'm talking about
Parenting. Yeah, no, I know. I'm just reinforcing for people who are eye rolling. It is absolutely a game changer.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So I committed to spending 20 to 30 minutes a day checking in with my inner child. I decided the time and I set my alarm and I set my reminders or whatever. I cannot tell you what it's been doing. I have made 5 comics about my mom and healing, and they've all been healing. And Just that there's tremendous amount of creativity and joy, because I think my default, unfortunately, for a long time has just been to like get through. But that part of myself that's young and alive and smart and funny, just there's so much more to my life and to myself. And it's just been like, you just a few minutes every day,
Yeah.
you know?
I love that. I think it's so illustrative of the fact that recovering from childhood narcissistic abuse is really spending the rest of your life uncovering who you are. Yeah. In this really sort of sad but beautiful way.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you have like a specific tool that's helping you do that. That's really special. And I can't wait to see the comics. I know you sent me part of one of them, but I can't wait to see them.
Okay.
My tool came about inadvertently. It's a friend of mine who knows me really well recommended this movie to me called Problemista. Shout out to Julio Torres. It's a great movie. And in this movie, there's a character who is pretty much exactly my mom. Like, looks like my mom, dresses like my mom, acts like my mom, is just a complete raging narcissist, is in the art world like my mom. And it was interesting because at first it was really triggering. Like when the character first came on screen, I felt myself getting really triggered. But throughout the movie, rightfully so, every other character is like, wow, that woman's a monster. That woman's horrible. You need to get away from that woman as quickly as you can. It was so validating to have someone talk about this character that way. Have everyone around the main character, I mean, sort of can't really see it or can see it, but is stuck with this person in a way. I don't want to give away too much about the movie because it's really good. To have all the other characters in the movie like recognize and point out how horrible this woman's behavior was.
Yeah.
Really healing. It was really, really healing.
And that's one thing about going no contact, which is there are so many people in the world who are kind and nice and interesting and you can do fun stuff with. And all of that energy is just going to the narcissist and the flying monkeys. And it is so unnecessary, just unnecessary.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. I found that after I went no contact, and I still find myself falling into this a little bit, is sometimes I will get, I'll say lonely or bored, but what I realize it actually is that I have extra energy now and I don't have an outlet for it yet. Right. And again, that comes back to sort of the like finding out who we are. Like, I didn't know what to do with all that energy because I didn't know who I was. So I didn't know like what hobbies I liked or what I was interested in or, you know, what I wanted to do to some degree, because all of that energy had been going towards the narcissist. And so when I went no contact, it took me a while before I could fill up my life with something other, with people and activities and things other than the narcissist. So, all right. I feel like that's a good place to stop for today. We so appreciate you sticking with us and listening this far. And if your mom is as bad as our moms are, we invite you to just agree. Say, yep, you're right. I'm the villain. You got it. You're absolutely right. And then gray rock and then walk the hell away.
And if that makes you the villain, which she secretly has been telling everybody all along, okay, be the villain.
Thank you for listening. We'd be so grateful if you'd follow or subscribe and rate and review our new podcast on your favorite podcast app.
Make sure to share it with friends, family, or anyone that you think may benefit from this content.
And as a final reminder, you are not the crazy one.